The Thompson family's annual trust meeting was always an exercise in calculated cruelty, but this year's gathering at the family estate took it to new heights. I sat quietly in the oak-paneled study as Uncle George, the lead trustee, delivered his verdict. "The board has reviewed your petition for inclusion," he announced, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Given your limited success in business, we've decided to maintain your exclusion from the family trust." My cousins, William and Victoria, exchanged smirks from their leather armchairs. They'd never forgiven me for choosing to start my own investment firm instead of joining the family's real estate business. Limited success? I kept my voice neutral, thinking of the documents waiting in my office at Shadow Peak Capital, the investment company I'd built while they thought I was struggling with a cute little finance hobby. "Face it, Rebecca," Victoria chimed in, adjusting her Cartier bracelet. "Managing small business loans isn't exactly Thompson-worthy achievement. The trust is for family members who contribute to our legacy." If they only knew that Shadow Peak Capital had quietly become one of the largest private lending institutions in the region. That we'd been systematically acquiring the debt of Thompson Holdings through various shell companies. That their legacy was already more mine than theirs. "We're doing you a favor," Uncle George continued, his signet ring catching the light as he signed the rejection document. "The trust comes with responsibilities you're clearly not ready for." My phone buzzed discreetly. A message from Marcus, my chief investment officer. "Thompson Holdings' latest loan request approved by their bank. We can acquire it through Wellington Finance tomorrow." I typed back, "Proceed. Time to close the net." "Perhaps next year," William offered with fake sympathy. "If you find a more substantial career." Substantial. Like his job as VP of Thompson Holdings, a position earned solely through DNA rather than ability. The same company that was now leveraged to the hilt, though they didn't know it yet. "Speaking of careers," Uncle George interjected, "Thompson Holdings is expanding again. 3 new developments breaking ground next month. That's what real success looks like." My phone lit up again. "Marcus, their debt-to-equity ratio just hit critical levels. Bank's starting to get nervous." "Impressive," I murmured, thinking of the financial analysis that showed those developments were built on foundations of sand and overleveraged loans. "The funding all secured?" "Of course," William boasted. "Banks are fighting to work with us. The Thompson name opens all doors." If he only knew that those competing banks were all selling their Thompson Holdings debt to my shell companies within days of origination. That every loan they celebrated was actually another thread in my carefully woven web. "Well," I stood, smoothing my simple black dress Chanel, though without the obvious logos they preferred. "I should get back to my small business." "Don't feel too bad," Victoria called after me. "Not everyone is cut out for real success. Someone has to handle the smaller things in life." I paused at the door. "You're right, Victoria. It's all about knowing your place in the financial ecosystem." My phone buzzed one final time. "Marcus, all pieces in position. Total debt control reaches 67% next week when their construction loans roll over. 6 months. That's how long I'd calculated it would take for their house of cards to collapse. 6 months until they discovered that their biggest creditor wasn't some faceless bank, but the cousin they deemed not successful enough. "Oh," I turned back, unable to resist. "Good luck with the Riverside development funding. I hear the credit markets can be unpredictable." Uncle George's head snapped up. "How did you know about Riverside?" "That's not public information." "Just following the market," I smiled. "After all, small business lending teaches you to pay attention to details." As I left the estate, I heard William's dismissive laugh. As if she could understand something like Riverside. Probably read it in some local business journal. If they only knew that Shadow Peak Capital already controlled the primary loans on the Riverside property. That their entire expansion plan hinged on financing that I could restructure with a single phone call. The next 3 months transformed Thompson Holdings from a symbol of family wealth into a case study in financial overreach. I watched from Shadow Peak's real headquarters, a modern tower they'd never bothered to visit, as their empire began its calculated descent. The first cracks appeared in the Riverside development. Cost overruns, permit delays, and suddenly nervous lenders created a perfect storm of financial pressure. Thompson Holdings found themselves navigating increasingly difficult loan negotiations, unaware that every new lender was actually another Shadow Peak subsidiary. Williams called an emergency board meeting. My cousin Emma texted, the only family member who'd stayed in touch after I'd been excluded from the trust. Uncle George looks worried. I pulled up the real-time financial dashboard showing Thompson Holdings' position. Worried was an understatement. Their leverage ratios had exceeded critical levels, and the credit markets were tightening exactly as I'd planned. Sarah, my head of risk management, entered with the latest reports. Their primary lender is calling for an emergency review. The trust's guarantees are being questioned. And our positions? We now control 82% of their outstanding debt through various entities. The remaining creditors are following our lead on terms and conditions. My phone lit up with another message from Emma. They're talking about selling assets to raise capital. Victoria's crying about having to list her Aspen house. Those assets. The same properties they'd leveraged multiple times, using the family name to secure loans that any competent risk manager would have rejected. Now the bills were coming due and the Thompson name wasn't quite as magical as they'd thought. Sarah, I turned to my risk manager. Initiate Phase 3. Start calling in the short-term notes. The next trust meeting was considerably less pompous than the last. Uncle George's signet ring seemed heavier as he shuffled through increasingly dire financial reports. William's designer suit looked slept in, and Victoria's Cartier bracelet was conspicuously absent. These credit conditions are unprecedented, William insisted, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. Nobody could have predicted dash. Actually, I interrupted quietly, some people did predict this. Risk management isn't just for small businesses. The room fell silent. Uncle George's face flushed dark red. If you're here to gloat dash. I'm here as your largest creditor, I corrected him, enjoying how their eyes widened. Shadow Peak Capital holds the majority of Thompson Holdings' debt. We're concerned about your ability to meet obligations. Shadow Peak. Victoria whispered. The investment firm that's been buying up distressed real estate debt? The same, I confirmed, pulling out a detailed portfolio analysis. We've been monitoring Thompson Holdings positions for quite some time. Your leverage on the Riverside development alone exceeds the total value of your unencumbered assets. Emma's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Rebecca, you knew? I tried to warn you, I reminded them. When I submitted those risk analyses with my trust inclusion petition. But complex financial strategies were beneath your consideration, weren't they, Uncle George? He lunged forward, face contorted. You engineered this. You're deliberately destroying the family business. The markets did that, I replied calmly. I just understood the mechanics better than your outdated business model. Now about those loan covenants. The next hour was a systematic dissection of Thompson Holdings' imminent collapse. Every risk I'd identified, every warning they'd dismissed, laid bare in stark financial terms. The trustees grew paler with each revelation. This is impossible, William muttered, staring at the numbers. We can't be this exposed. Your development projects are underwater by $500 million, I explained. Your cross-collateralization strategy has failed. And your primary asset base is leveraged at 12 times earnings. Uncle George slumped in his chair, his trustee authority finally cracking. The investors are already pulling out, I finished for him. Words out about Thompson Holdings' liquidity problems. The smart money started moving last month. The final dismantling of Thompson Holdings played out like a financial symphony I'd spent years composing. Every note of their collapse, every measure of their downfall, executed with precise timing and devastating effect. Financial news channels ran constant coverage. Thompson Holdings faces catastrophic debt crisis. Shadow Peak Capital emerges as kingmaker in Thompson restructuring. From trust exclusion to total control, the ultimate financial revenge. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from family members who dismissed me for years. About that trust decision. Remember that Christmas party where? Regarding my Aspen property. I deleted them all, focusing instead on the restructuring plan that would transform Thompson Holdings from a family vanity project into a professionally managed enterprise. The family estate where they'd so proudly excluded me from the trust, became the setting for their final humiliation. I called a full family meeting, not as the excluded cousin but as their primary creditor. "The numbers are final," Sarah reported, distributing detailed financial analyses to the shell-shocked family members. "Total leverage exceeds $11 billion. Their equity position is effectively negative. Uncle George, his signet ring now conspicuously absent, could barely meet my eyes. There must be some arrangement, some way to maintain family control." "Family control is what got us here," I replied, pulling up the complete restructuring plan. "Shadow Peak will assume operational control of all Thompson Holdings assets. The trust will be dissolved and reconstructed under professional management." "Dissolved?" Victoria's voice cracked. "But the trust is our legacy." "The trust," I corrected her, "is now effectively owned by its creditors. Which means it's owned by me." William, looking nothing like the smug VP who'd mocked my small business lending, finally found his voice. How long have you been planning this?" I showed them my first debt acquisition, a small Thompson Holdings loan I'd bought 5 years ago, right after being excluded from the trust. "Since the day you decided I wasn't successful enough to manage family money. I'd say the market has rendered a different verdict." The restructuring was comprehensive. Thompson Holdings' viable assets were consolidated under Shadow Peak's management. The over-leveraged developments were sold or reorganized. The family members who'd lived off trust distributions found themselves facing an unfamiliar concept: earning their way. Victoria's Aspen House went on the market. William's executive position was eliminated. Uncle George's trustee authority was transferred to a professional board that actually understood modern finance. 6 months later, I hosted a different kind of family meeting. The same oak-paneled study now served as a classroom of sorts, where former trust beneficiaries learned about responsible financial management and sustainable business practices. "The market doesn't care about your last name," I told them, standing where Uncle George once sat. "It doesn't respect family legacy or trust fund status. It only respects competence and proper risk management." Emma thrived in the new reality, her natural business acumen finally finding expression as head of our retail development division. Others struggled. More years of trust fund dependence made the transition to actual work challenging. 1 year later, during a global investment conference, a young analyst asked me the question everyone wondered about: why take over the family business? Why not just let them fail completely? I showed her my original trust exclusion letter, framed in my office. Because sometimes the best lessons come from the same people who dismissed you. The Thompson name still means something in business. It just means something different now. The family dynamics shifted permanently. Holiday gatherings were no longer dominated by trust distribution discussions. Instead, conversations focused on actual business metrics and sustainable growth strategies. Even William learned to read a proper balance sheet, though his corner office was now a cubicle in risk management. I maintained Shadow Peak's original office, a reminder that real financial power doesn't need mahogany panels or family crests. Success is built on understanding numbers, not inheriting them. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I'd review the Thompson Holdings acquisition, not with satisfaction at their downfall, but with appreciation for the lesson it taught. True financial acumen isn't inherited through a trust, it's earned through understanding and respect for market fundamentals. The old family motto, blood and legacy, was replaced with something more appropriate: competence and accountability. The Thompson name became associated with financial responsibility rather than entitled excess. Uncle George eventually found a role teaching financial ethics at a local college, a fitting epilogue for someone who'd learned about risk management the hard way. Victoria discovered she had a talent for property management once she actually had to work at it. William, stripped of his VP title, became a decent analyst when forced to understand the numbers he once dismissed. The trust, now professionally managed, actually grew for the first time in decades. Its distributions were based on merit and contribution rather than birth order or family politics. The next generation of Thompsons would inherit something more valuable than money. They'd inherit financial literacy and respect for market realities. I kept my original business plan, framed alongside the trust exclusion letter. A reminder that sometimes being left out is the best motivation to build something better. Because in the end, true financial success isn't about being born into the right family or inheriting the right trust. It's about understanding the fundamental principles that govern wealth and risk, about building something sustainable while others rely on their last name. And sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in watching a family empire crumble. It's in rebuilding it into something worthy of the power they thought they understood. The final irony? The trust they'd excluded me from now generates more wealth than ever, managed by the same small business lender they dismissed. Every quarter, when the performance reports show another record return, I send copies to Uncle George's ethics class. Some lessons are best taught by example. Each year on the anniversary of my trust exclusion, I host a special seminar for young financial professionals, teaching them the lessons that the Thompson family learned the hard way. The most important lesson? Never underestimate someone just because they don't fit your preconceived notion of success. Victoria sometimes asks me why I keep the old trust exclusion letter so prominently displayed. Isn't it time to let go of the past? She'll say. I always remind her that it's not about holding on to hurt. It's about remembering that motivation often comes from unexpected sources. The family estate, once a symbol of inherited privilege, now houses Shadow Peak's training academy. New analysts learn in the same room where I was once deemed not successful enough. There's a certain poetry in watching fresh graduates master complex financial strategies where old money once dictated terms based on bloodlines. Because in the end, the most valuable trust isn't the one you inherit. It's the one you build through competence, integrity, and the wisdom to know that true power lies not in what you're given, but in what you create despite being left out.